The Elder Scrolls universe is containing a vast and intricate lore, and while playing the games you get a grip of the overarching theme and story, but virtually all intricacies and workings of the universe are hidden within lore books. And look, I get it, reading, but fret not. I have decided to read every single lore book I come across for you to listen to, so you get a better understanding of this world without having to sit over hundreds of lore books. In this episode, I have the 10 lore books of Bangkorai from Shalidor's library prepared for you. Despite seeming like a zone that's kinda boring, I was surprised about the high quality of books and intricate stories hidden within. These videos are specifically designed to be listened to in the background and are done completely without the use of AI. Every book has been practice read, yes, I have to practice read that stuff, and then recorded by me, and every voice effect you will hear has been manually added. One last thing before we get started. If you enjoy these audiobooks, then consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. A lot of work and care goes into these videos, and it would be amazing if we can reach the subscriber goal of 500 by the end of October. Now, I have strained your patience long enough. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the lore books of Bangkorai. The True Troll Tale of Hallin, Part 1. From The Histories of Histories, as told to young Prince Vaharajat. Know then, O Prince, that after the regatta had swept across Hammerfell, driving all the Tusk folk before it, a time of peace befell whereupon the people who were once Ughhhhs were able to lay down the sword and take up the shovel and trowel. And for 3 spans of a person's life, all the Red Guards did delve and build, and many were the great works that were erected above the sands, and few did study the way of the sword, for all were constructing monuments to the greatness of our people. Now, east of the Alik'r and south of the pass of Bangkorai, the ever-laudable Queen Ughhhh did cause to have built a city of splendor, all white stone and fluted columns, and the city was named Ughhhh after its thrice eminent monarch. And its streets and broad avenues were replete with houses and halls devoted to all the arts, both mercantile and inspirational. The people strolled the streets, bedecked in fine garments and bedizened with bright jewels, and partaking of delicate viands and hearkening to tunes, both rousing and restful. And all was pleasing thereby. In an unconsidered corner in the shadow of the walls stood the city's Hall of the Virtues of War, and there did the worthy Hallin, being the last of the Ansei, teach such of Ughhhh's youth as were yet to incline the way of the sword. Now these youths were few, and though they suffered raillery and unkind badinage from their peers, they found the aging Hallin an inspiration nonetheless, and learned the way of the sword until they became true Redguard warriors. And this was, well, as you shall see. For in the mountain range called Dragon's Tail, the Tusk folk still lurked, beating their breasts and rending their ragged garments in rage and grievance against the Red Guards. And among them was a great goblin warlord who had escaped the curse of Divad through a chicanery and thus had not been diminished. This giant goblin was possessed of both slyness and sinew, and long he worked among the tribes of Dragon's Tail, until one day he awoke to find himself warlord of all the Tusk folk therein. And his name was Maxor Rockhand. So Maxor raised his great blade, Bone Hewer, and roared in a mighty voice like an earthquake, and declared that the day of vengeance at last was at hand. Then Magzor led his endwise army down from the dragon's tail, and it swept into Hammerfell like a great sandstorm, and none could stand before it. The people of the fallen waste fled before the fury of the Tuskfolk, and many were those who sought refuge behind the walls of Ughhhh until the city was overfilled thereby. The citizens cried out in distress and apprehension, saying, "Who will fight for us, O Queen Ughhhh? For we have become artisans and peasants' rights, and have forgotten the way of the sword." And Queen Ughhhh spake, saying, "Are there none among us who remember the way of the sword?" Then Venerable Hallin stepped forward and bowed before his monarch, saying, "I remember the way of the sword, O my queen, or at least as much as I may, for I am the last Ansei. What I can do, I shall." Hallin's students then stepped forward as well, and laid their swords at the feet of their queen. But the thrice eminent Ughhhh was dismayed by their fewness, and spake distraught, saying, "How shall we repel the Endwise army with so few blades? For the Tuskfolk are as numberless as the sand in the dunes." But Hallin was nowise deterred, and said boldly, "Take heart, O illustrious majesty, for your people are Redguards, which means they come easily to the way of the sword, and once they have their hands once again on the hilts of blades, and learn to quote once more from the Book of Circles, they will be a match for any folk in all the round world, be they ever so numberless." "Be that as it may, Venerable Ansei," replied Queen Ughhhh, "but even Redguards need time to learn the way of the sword, and of time we have but little." "Then you must have more. Finding you a store of time shall be my task, the culmination of the work of my life, and I swear upon Ansei's bright blade, you shall have it." And he drew his blade, yeah, even in the presence of the queen, and swore an oath upon the brotherhood and sisterhood of the blade, and behold, Hallin seemed to grow to the stature of a giant, and a light shone from his blade's sharp edge, and all were obliged to avert their gaze. Yet when they were able to look once more, they saw naught but the venerable Hallin, smiling and sheathing his blade. And the last Ansei raised his hands, as if to embrace all the people of Ughhhh, and said, "Fellow Redguards, to you I bequeath the knowledge of the Book of Circles, which we have guarded long and well, that you may be equal to all threats whatsoever. These, my students, shall teach you their learning, and in good time you will all know once more the way of the sword." He returned then to Queen Ughhhh and said, "Now lead your people, O mighty monarch, for that is what you do best. Take them to the west and spread the word of the way of the sword, that Hammerfell might make itself ready for the Endwise army. I shall abide here in your city, which I and the other Ansei shall defend so long as we may, until our people are ready to fight for themselves." The True Told Tale of Hallin, Part 2. So Queen Ughhhh took the venerable Hallin at his word, and forthwith ordered her people to march west toward Alik'r, while daily drilling from the Book of Circles. But Queen Ughhhh did more. As she was a wise queen, she was an owl friend, and had decreed that all owls were to be honored and none slain. And in return, the owls did many a favor for her, So the queen did call the father of owls and asked him to bide in Ughhhh and observe Hallin's defense. For I would learn, she said, how one man shall defend a city entire. Even as the last of the people of Ughhhh departed from her gates to take the secret ways to Alik'r, the scouts of the Tusk folk appeared in the east, where they were noted by Hallin, for though he was old, his eyes were keen. Then Hallin spake, though there was none to hear but the father of owls, saying, as the snake sheds its skin, so shall the Ansei rise anew from the husks of the past. He raised his sword and cried, Sisters, brothers, I summon you to the succor of your people, for time folds upon itself, and then time is now. And he gestured with his blade to the left, and all along the battlements to the north there was a rustling as of snakeskins, and lo, there arose along the parapets the shadows of a legion. And there stood the semblances of all the female Ansei who ever were, and they turned to Hallin and saluted. So Hallin gestured likewise to the right, and along the battlements to the south there was a rustling, and lo, there arose the semblances of all the male Ansei who ever were, and they likewise saluted Hallin, and then all, north and south, drew their bright blades and stood on the battlements awaiting. The scouts of the Tusk folk stopped forthwith to observe the defences of Ughhhh. Surprised were they to see the battlements lined with goodly warriors, for they had been told that the folk of the city had forgot the way of the sword. So they did consult among themselves as to who would carry this news to Warlord Masgor, and quarrel and quibble, for they feared the bearer of such news would have his head struck off. But finally the smallest, with many blows, was made to carry the report back to the warlord. So the scout reported to Masgor that, unaccountably, the walls of Ughhhh were lined with many goodly defenders. Of an instant, the rock hand struck off the scout's head, but then he took thought, for he was possessed of both slyness and sinew. And his thoughts were, what matter? We are as numberless as the sand in the dunes. We shall surround this Ughhhh, leaving neither entry nor egress. We shall despoil their fields of its provender, and stop up the streams of their flow, until no one within shall have to eat or to drink, and thus the city shall fall. So Masgor ordered, and so it came to pass. The Tusk folk took their leisure among the spoils of the outworks, casting jeers and taunts at the defenders on the walls. But the defenders replied not. So Masgor and his army waited, amusing themselves most abominably at the expense of their prisoners, secure that, in time, the defenders of Ughhhh must wither and dwindle. But it was not so. Even long after, when the warlord's bone counters calculated there must be no more to eat or to drink within the city, the defenders stood still stalwart and saying naught. So Masgor summoned his shamans, saying, Shamans, have we been befooled by the perfidious Red Guards? Are these goodly warriors we see lining the battlements, or are they but shadows? So the shamans cast the portents and sacrificed twin infants, and sent a scullion to the east gate, whom Hallin did spear from above. And they returned and said, Nay, mighty Masgor, we are not befooled, for these are goodly warriors we see lining the battlements. But how they may stand when they have not to eat or to drink, this we cannot tell. Of an instant, Masgor struck off the shamans' heads, then raised the bloody bone hewer and cried, To arms! Form ranks! For tonight we drink the blood of the defenders of Ughhhh. Of Of that battle, no living Redguard survived to tell the tale. But nonetheless did wise Queen Ughhhh hear of it in full, for the father of owls did bear the tale to her ear. He told of how Hallin and his Ansei withstood the assault, for 17 days. But though they were goodly warriors, over time the Ansei did dwindle, though each left behind only a husk, like onto a snakeskin. Finally, only Hallin stood at the east gate, which was burst open by Warlord Masgor, with Bone Hewer held high. And Hallin did seem to grow to match him in size, and the two met, sword to sword. Long and long their blades clashed, until finally as the moons rose, the rock hand smote Hallin such a blow that he was struck to the ground. But even as he fell, Hallin, who knew the cuts and thrusts of the Book of Circles, each and every one, swung his sword and struck off the head of the Warlord Masgor. Then both were dead. But in death, only one was smiling and serene. Queen Ughhhh nodded to hear this news and said, "It is well." And she turned to her mighty army of Redguard warriors, each of which knew the cuts and thrusts of the Book of Circles, each and every one, and said, "Redguards, march we now to retake our lands from the Tuskfolk, and when we have regained our splendid city once more, we shall rename it Hallin's Stand. And so it shall be. And so it has been, ever after." The Viridian Sentinel. Hush, my dear. Go back to sleep. The trolls can't get you here. Not so long as there is a Viridian Sentinel. What's that? You want to hear about the Viridian Sentinel again? Of course, my dear. Just lie back on your pillow and listen. Everyone in northern Bangkorai knows about the Viridian Sentinel. The Sentinel is the guardian who makes all the wild things stay in the woods. The trolls, the bears, the witches and their wolves. None may come into the vanquished lands from the wild so long as the Sentinel keeps watch. And the Sentinel will always keep watch. Did you know there was a time when there was no Viridian Sentinel? It was long, long ago in the before times. We Bretons had just won our freedom from the Dareni elves, and the elves were still spiteful about it. "Go ahead, take these lands you call High Rock," they said. "You will not have them long. We will retreat to our towered island. We will renounce our covenant with the Earth Bones. We will give these lands back to the wild." As is often the way when elves speak, we did not understand what they meant, so we merely shrugged and set about the hard work of making the land our own. We plowed fields and sowed crops. We fenced meadows and made pastures for our livestock. We built roads and market towns so our people could sell each other their produce and wares, and all seemed well. But then bad things began to happen on the farms nearest the woods. Witches lurked under the eaves, and Bretons who got too close to the forest began to disappear into its shadows, never to be seen again. Soon, the farmers had to abandon the fields that were next to the woods. It got worse. Things began to come out of the woods. Fell creatures and beasts, mostly at night, but sometimes even in the day. And they roamed across the farmlands, menacing the farm families and slaying them when they could. Many farmers said, "We cannot stand before these creatures from the wild. Come, we shall leave our farms and go to the towns." But when they got to the towns, they found there was no work for farmers, and even worse, there was little or nothing to eat, because the farmers were no longer sending food to the towns. The townspeople blamed the farmers for abandoning their farms, and the farmers blamed the townspeople for not sending their armed watch to guard them. No one could agree on what to do. One of the farm boys, a lad named Wyrd, was very worried. He went into the chapel and prayed earnestly to Standar, saying, "O righteous Lord of mercy and protection, we are in sore plight and in need of your aid. For the beasts of the wild are no longer contained, and our lands are reverting to the wilderness. Soon there will be no place for mortals who love order and harmony. I fear we will become beasts, forget our names, and turn our back on the divines. Show us, O Lord, how this may be prevented." Then a kingfisher flew into the chapel and landed on the altar before Wyrd. It was a very large kingfisher, larger than any the lad had ever seen. It cocked its head and then began to whistle and clack its beak. And Wyrd seemed to hear speech among the whistles and clacks. Words that said, "The beasts come out of the wild because they have forgotten your names, and believe you to be beasts like themselves, whom it is lawful to slay. Someone must go to the wild and tell the beasts that he has a name, and the vanquished lands are forfeit to his claim." Then the kingfisher made a small mess, as birds will, and flew away. The lad bowed and said, "I shall do this for my family and the other families of the vanquished lands." He hugged his father, he kissed his mother, and he left the town and went back to the edge of the wild. There he met a savage tiger, who made as if to pounce upon him, but the lad said, "It is not lawful to pounce upon me, for I have a name, and am no beast. My name is Wyrd, and I claim this land as vanquished. Return to the wilds, and come here no more." And you know what? The savage tiger did exactly that. And so did the ravening wolves, and the shambling bears, and the fierce trolls, and the wicked spriggans, all returned to the wild and came to the vanquished lands no more. When this was done, the lad hoped his work was over and he could return to his family, but it was not so. For always new beasts came from the wild who had to be taught the boundaries. So the lad lived thereafter under the eaves of the wood and walked the edge of the wild, telling the beasts his name and turning them back. And our people called him the Viridian Sentinel. Eventually, the Sentinel grew old and felt that soon he might walk the borders no more. He began to worry. But a girl came to him and said she had been spoken to by a bird, and thereafter the two walked the border together. And when the Sentinel finally passed on, and his name went with his soul to Aetherius, the girl became the new Viridian Sentinel, and the vanquished lands were still safe. So it has been ever after, and so it will always be. Living with Lycanthropy. Throughout the ages, whenever one heard the word werewolf, it was a cry of fear and revulsion. This need not be the case any longer. We shall prove to Tamriel that it is indeed possible to live a productive, peaceful life while afflicted with Sanius lupinus. Our rule: resist the urge to commit violence. By withdrawing from society, one can learn how to apply this simple rule to everyday life. Do not give in to a feral desire to retaliate against those who cannot understand our plight. We are not meant to destroy others simply for sport. Hircine blessed us with the ability to fight well, with a strength beyond that of an ordinary person. We must not take advantage of this blessing to hurt anyone, but rather use it in ways to benefit others like ourselves. Hunting can be a rewarding pastime and a way of worshipping our patron. It should not be a way to torment others, whether man or beast. This blessing, for it is a blessing and not a curse, allows us to carry heavy loads and to cover vast distances without tiring. We make excellent traveling merchants for this reason, as well as laborers of all kinds. By showing continued restraint, by not lifting our hand against others, by proving that hunger does not drive us to kill, we honor ourselves and our families. It is our duty to demonstrate that werewolves can be peaceful through our continued faith in Hircine's blessings. Alive, Barbaric and Brutal by Orthanes Belloc. Chapter 1. Abducted by the Reachmen. I was born in Mercian's hamlet, just north across the Jules Say from Evermore. My mother was a weaver, and my father was a boat builder who made small fishing smacks and coracles for the river trade. I remember my youth as a happy one, playing around the docks where father worked, or hunting through the near woods for antoloma caps and hickory nuts. It was while doing the latter one day that I strayed a bit farther from the hamlet than usual, pushed my way through a briar thicket, and suddenly found myself staring at a pair of human skulls. Startled, I shrieked and dropped my basket of nuts. By the time I realized that what I'd seen was a skull on a staff next to a woman's face painted like a skull, I'd been knocked down, bound, and thrown over her shoulder. I was being borne away to the north, away from my home and into the mountains. I began to kick and scream, at which the woman threw me down, bound me tighter, and gagged me into the bargain. Then she resumed carrying me off into the wilds. Eventually, I passed out from sheer exhaustion. When I awoke, it was dark, but I could see forms in the dance of the firelight. Silhouettes sporting horns, bones, spikes, feathers. Breachmen. I closed my eyes and tried to wake up, but it was no nightmare. When I opened my eyes, they were still there. My gag was gone, so I cried out for water. The skull-faced woman, whom I later learned was named Ughhhh, brought me a cap. She checked my bonds, and where I winced in pain, she actually loosened them a little. This surprised me, as I'd always heard that the Reach clans were barbarians, wicked Daedra worshippers who reveled in cruelty. Maybe, once they realized how distressed I was, they would set me free and send me home. It was a false hope. I was to be captive of the Crow-Wife clan for the next 8 years. The Reachmen were far more complex than I had been led to believe in my Breton home. But in one thing, we were right. Barbarism and cruelty are everyday facts of life in the Reach. Ughhhh was a horse breeder who had abducted me because she needed a slave to tend to her livestock, since her former thrall had died of a kick to the head. She had given me water and loosened my bonds solely out of concern for the condition of her new possession. Voange's clan was ruled by a haygraven named Cloavdra, a claw-fingered crone who was a witch shaman of considerable power. She was a priestess of Nemira the Spirit Daedra, the Lady of Ancient Darkness who commands repulsive vermin such as spiders, insects, slugs, and serpents. Because Nemira is the mistress of small pests, the Reachmen call her the Children's God. They are not without humor, though their jests are always malicious. At every 2 moons dark, Cloavdra would draw lots at random from the children of the clan, both reach and slave, to select a sacrifice to the goddess of the dark. The chosen child would end up on the ever-oozing altar, where Cloavdra would cut out its heart as an offering to Nemira. Every time I was sure it would be me, but the name feather drawn was always of another. Cloavdra's hag husband was a crude and vicious man named Cointhak. He was a grave singer, a witchman shaman who could command the dead. In our land, we would call him a necromancer. He was always looking sidewise at Voange and licking his lips as at a savory roast fowl. Though he had power in the clan and was feared by all, Voange treated him with disdain, which would sometimes provoke him into sending hoot horns into her tent at night, or hexing the horse's oats with wraithworm. Voange never turned a hair, just threatened to complain about Cointhak to his hagwife Cloavdra, which always sent him packing. Life was hard in the Reach. Crowwife was a hunting clan, so our life was following the herds across the wastes. It was a rugged and perilous existence, where life could be snuffed out in a heartbeat by the antlers of an elf buck or the fangs of a saber cat. But what I feared most were the semi-annual crossings of the Karth River in the wake of the tundra herds. It was my job to help Voange and her useless daughter swim the horses across the ice-cold, swirling current, and every time I was certain it would be my last. How I wished I had learned to swim in the Jewel Sea, like my 2 brothers whenever the Karth had me in its grip. Occasionally, during a crossing, one of the horses would panic and break free of us, which usually meant drowning and death for it. Then Voange and I would search far downstream until we found where its body had washed up, so we could skin and unmake the dead horse for its valuable fat, flesh, and bones. Nothing was wasted among the Reachmen. It was during my 6th summer as a slave of the Crowwives, I had crossed the hated Karth 11 times, that I began to attract the unwanted attentions of Eoknual, the loutish son of Cloavdra and Cointhak. He expressed his attraction by pushing me into mud puddles or putting dead voles in my stew. He was a year younger than me, but soon I knew he would want me to do the object of more than just practical jokes. As the son of the Haygraven, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted with impunity, and Voange couldn't protect me by complaining to Cloavdra. The old Virago would just cackle and waver away. So at night, when I should have been sleeping in my pile of furs, I started making a spear. The Glenmoril Wyrd by Lady Cinnabar of Taneth. No folk in Tamriel have been more misunderstood than the witches of the Glenmoril Wyrd. Primarily, I believe, because all the scholars who have previously written about them have been men. This is not to say that the groundbreaking work of Venerable Kigyo of Lilmoth and Professor Barst of Shat Astola are to be entirely discounted, merely that their objectivity has been colored and undermined by their cultural assumptions of male superiority. To be clear, it is not the fact that I am a woman that makes me somehow emotionally better suited to understand the sisterhood of the Glenmoril Wyrd. On the contrary, it is my proven ability to be objective in the context of traditional gender roles, as shown in my celebrated track, Saint and Slave Queen, Alessia and the Lens of Gender, that makes me uniquely qualified to address the subject of a single-sex society like that of the Wyrd Sisters. The Glenmoril Wyrd are a loose association of female witch covens who revere nature and the natural world, and incline toward Daedra worship. Racially, they are almost entirely human, though some covens include human hybrids such as Haygraven and Lamias, who usually rule the covens they live in. Their preference for life in the wilderness means their covens are usually located far from the agriculture or pastoral enclaves of civilized people, which contributes to the lack of understanding of their true natures. This has led to the Glenmoril covens nearly always being described in terms such as uncanny, reclusive, dangerous, inimical, and evil. In fact, the Glenmoril Wyrd are all of these things, except, I would argue, evil. It is true that they are unswervingly committed to a rejection of civilization and civilized ways. It is true they admit no male members to their covens. It is true they regard themselves as enforcers of certain laws of nature, which only they recognize. This does not make them evil, just strict adherence to moral codes that are different from our own. The fact that the Glenmoril covens seem able to maintain their populations without admitting men into their numbers is also an object of suspicion for those who live in their vicinities. There is an age-old libel that the Wyrd Sisters replenish themselves by stealing girl children from neighboring farms, but such a practice has never been documented, except in the case of the notorious Fen Witches of Hjalmarch, but they worship Molag Bal and child abduction is the least of their objectionable habits. My inquiries, which have been extensive, lead me to the conclusion that in most cases, covens gain new members when unwanted girl children are brought to them by distressed parents. What happens to unwanted boy children in the northern regions is probably a question best left unasked. Though the Glenmoril Wyrd are numerically few, geographically they are widespread, from the easternmost Greenspring Coven in central Skyrim to the westernmost coven in the Ellesen Hills of High Rock. Most of the 8 or so known covens are adherents of Hircine, but the Hagfather Coven of Western Falkreath reveres Nemira. The Morkoth Sisters, the only urban coven, worships Mehrunes Dagon, and the aforementioned Fen Witches of Hjalmarch are followers of Molag Bal. Relationships with the Reachmen, the other main Daedra worshippers of the Northern Wilds, vary from coven to coven and from Reach clan to Reach clan. The Hagfeather Coven, the Rimerock Wyrd, and the Morkoth Sisters all have cordial relations with the Reachmen, but the western covens of the Ellesen Hills and Viridian Woods have a history of conflict with the Reach clans that dates back thousands of years. This may be accounted for by the fact that the Ellesen and Viridian Wyrd venerate the less feral aspects of Hircine and have been known to provide cures for lycanthropy, whereas the Reachmen prefer Hircine's more vicious side, celebrating lycanthropy as a gift rather than a curse. This, then, is a summary of what is known about the widespread but elusive sisters of the Glenmoril Wyrd. Many questions certainly remain unanswered and much research remains to be done. To address these issues properly, it might even be necessary to leave Taneth and mount a personal expedition into the northern wilds, assuming a generous patron steps forward to finance such a worthwhile, scholarly effort. Bangkorai, Shield of High Rock. King Eamon's final address to his troops. Knights of St. Pellen, Evermore Guard, freeborn militia of Mornoth and Ephesus, soldiers of Bangkorai, ever have we been the shield of High Rock, the first line of defense for the Breton kingdoms against invaders from the east. Time and again, the Bretons of Evermore and her surrounding regions have taken up arms to garrison Bangkorai Pass and turn away those who would pillage and plunder our homeland. In the year 874 of the First Era, when warlord Thulgag's army of orcs and goblins was driven from Hammerfell by the Red Guards, we denied them passage through the pass and forced them to flee northeast, trudging all the way through the Dragontail Mountains before they finally reached Orsinium. Not a single goblin made its way through our pickets into our homeland. Then, in 1029, when the legions of Empress Hestra deposed King Styric, the vampire of Verkov, he fled west at the head of his dreaded grey host, burning and killing as they came. But when his army of Batmen and wolves reached the Bangkorai garrison, they broke like a wave on a rock. Hestra's legions caught and killed the survivors, and the Empress was so impressed that she honored High Rock with admission into the First Empire. When, after almost 1,000 years under the Ruby Throne, the excesses of the Alessian Order forced High Rock to secede from the First Empire, the monks of Cyrodiil decided not to let us go peaceably. In 2305, under Abbot General Priscus Mactator, the legions of piety and grace were sent to bring the Bretons back into the fold. Mactator's fanatics filled the fallen wastes from end to end, but they could not pass the Bangkorai garrison, and after a 5-month siege, with the pious turning on the graceful, the Abbot General was forced to admit defeat and plot back to Cyrodiil in disgrace. Only once has the garrison failed to protect High Rock, when Dorkorak's Reachman horde poured down in south shore of the Jursei, filtering through the northwest spine that had always protected us before. Then, Evermore was sacked, and the garrison was taken from behind. But even then, we bought High Rock enough time that the Breton kingdoms were able to muster their troops and eventually repulse Dorkorak at Daggerfall. Today, invaders from the east threaten us once again, in the form of an Imperial Legion from Cyrodiil, but these are not the legendary warriors of the Empress Hestra or the disciplined soldiers of the Emperor Remen. These are the degraded mercenaries of the Tharn usurpers, and this legion is even led by a cousin of that decadent and faithless family. And who is this Magus General Septima Tharn? What battles has she won, beyond bullying freeholders for their back taxes? What barrel scrapings are these so-called legionaries she brings to pollute our homeland with their heretical Daedra-worshipping ways? I say they are scum, a desecration of the once noble name Imperial Legion. I say they are a rabble, and I say that with us manning the walls, they shall not pass the Bangkorai garrison. What say you, Knights of St. Pellen, Evermore Guard, freeborn militia of Mornoth and Ephesus, soldiers of Bangkorai? Will we betray the blood of our ancestors and allow enemies through the pass? Never, I say. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Aspects of Lord Hircine. Oral Traditions of the Reachman, number 5. By Juno Procillus, Academy of Coral. The following is the transcribed statement of a shaman of Druadak, who named himself Urakanak, the Witchman.
Like the fingers of your hand, like the clutch of the Hagraven, like the arrows to kill a bear, 5 are the aspects of Lord Hircine. You may meet any of the 5. All are true and right, and death in the woods. All are worthy of reverence. You may meet the hunter, who is invoked as Elrabag. He bears the spear of bitter mercy. He comes here from the hunting grounds to hunt new prey, or he brings prey native to the hunting grounds, like the unicorn, to hunt in new forests. If he brings not prey, then woe betide you who meet him, for he may dub you the hare. Then you must flee as best as you can, though you will not escape. You may meet the man-beast, who is invoked as Storybag. He wears the wolf's skull totem, and his growl is like a landslide in the Karth Gorge. He comes here to hunt with his children, the skin shifters, or to adopt new children and turn them pelt side out. His howl will freeze your innards like a pond in evening star at midnight. You will see your death approach, but be unable to flee. You may meet the great stag, who is invoked as Lycanthropy, and whose hoofs drum the blood summons. He comes to mate with the hinds, and may transform a comely woman for that purpose, or to cull the herd of the weak. Those who hear his drumbeat are doomed to run with the herd, and may follow him back to the hunting grounds, where they will be chased and unmade. You may meet the quick fox, who is invoked as Goolibag, and who wields the wand of bone. He comes here to confound mortal hunters, to run them in circles until they are so plaxed and wildered that they follow him over a cliff or into a trackless mire. He may fill you with such fury you can do naught but pursue him, or he may note you as clever and teach you his tricks. You may meet the mighty bear, who is invoked as Rockybag. He embodies the totem of claw and fang, and comes here seeking solitude, peace from labors, and renewal of the burning spirit within. Beware, for if you rouse him and disturb his serenity, you will be torn asunder. But if you approach him with deference and an offering of honey-sweet mead, he may grant you the power of the bear heart in your next fight. These are the 5. There are no more, and any who say so are witless and foolish. So states Urakanak, and whenever have I been proven false? I have said it, and it is so. Pass the Juniper draft.
The Legend of Fallen Grotto. Long ago, a man with 7 sons and 7 daughters lived in Bangkorai. Their home was in a deep and twisted cave at the edge of the woods. The surrounding forest was filled with all manner of creatures: bears, wolves, badgers, and deer. Though his family was large, they never knew hunger, for the animals were plentiful and easy prey. "We must give thanks for Hircine's blessing," said the man. And the man prayed to Hircine, building within his home a shrine to the god of the hunt. He painted the walls of the cave with pigments he made by combining animal fat with the earth. From the deer his children slew, the man took antlers to make an altar, and his wife braided hides into leather rugs to cover the dirt floor. When the shrine was complete, the man and his family lit tallow candles and roasted an ox, pouring its blood onto the altar as they chanted prayers. Suddenly, they heard a laugh, and before them stood Hircine himself, drawn by the death cry of the ox and the scent of its roasting flesh.
"You've done well,"
Hircine cried, striding forward. He was clad in layers of animal hide, though his feet were bare. "I am your faithful servant," said the man, groveling before his god.
"To prove your faith,
Said Hircine,
send forth your 7 sons and 7 daughters. I will hunt them from dawn until dusk, and from dusk until dawn, until I am sated."
The man recoiled in horror. "I cannot do that," he said. "You may take anything, but do not take my children from me." Eyes narrowing, Hircine raised one hand toward the cave's ceiling. Then he pointed to the ground with the other. Hircine screamed, and the walls collapsed inward, destroying the shrine and the man's home. As dust curled upward like a smoke from an offering, 16 forest trolls lumbered uncertainly from the debris, staggering from the grotto to the woods.
"You were not worthy of becoming beasts,
Hircine remarked cruelly.
but I shall hunt you anyway."
The posting of the hunt. Let no man say before a witness that the hunt has not been called, nor the rites declared, nor the ancient offices observed. The ritual of the innocent quarry, also called the Great Hunt, is an ancient rite drawing magical energy from the powerful magicka stream that engulfs this realm. The creators and times of the rituals are long forgotten, but followed properly, the rite brings great power and prestige to the huntsman. The ritual pits the all-powerful huntsmen and their greater and lesser dogs against the pitiful and doomed innocent quarry, called by tradition the hare, after the mortal creature of human hunts. At once, the huntsman is transported by the exquisite thrill and glory of his might and dominion over his helpless prey, and at the same time touched by the tragic, noble, and ultimately futile plight of the innocent quarry. In the highest aesthetic realization of the ritual, the ecstatic rapture of the kill is balanced by the huntsman's identification with the sadness and despair of the innocent quarry. As in pieces the body of the innocent hare is torn, the huntsman reflects on the tragic imbalances of power and the cruel injustices of the world. As the hunt begins, the lesser dogs assemble before the green crystal reflections of the chapel of the innocent quarry. Inside the chapel, the huntsman, the greater dogs, and the master of the hunt perform the rites that initiate and sanctify the huntsman, the hunt, and the innocent quarry. Then the huntsman emerges from the chapel, displays the spear of bitter mercy, and recites the offices of the hunt. The offices describe the laws and conditions of the 4 stages of the hunt: the drag, the chase, the call, and the view to the kill. Stage 1. The drag, in which the lesser dogs drag the ground to flush out the hare. Stage 2. The chase, in which the greater hounds drive the hare before them. Stage 3. The call, in which the greater hounds trap the hare and summon the huntsman for the kill. Stage 4. The view, in which the huntsman makes the kill with the ritual spear of bitter mercy and calls upon the master of the hunt to view the kill by ringing the town bell. The master of the hunt then bestows the bounty upon the huntsman bold, who has wielded the spear of bitter mercy in the kill. The master of the hunt also calls upon the huntsman bold to name the next hare for the next hunt, though the huntsman bold himself may not participate in the next hunt. The offices of the hunt, which the huntsman, master, and hounds are solemnly sworn to honor, detail the practices and conditions of the hunt. These practices and conditions, also known as the law, strictly define all details of the hunt, such as how many hounds of each sort may participate, how the Spear of Bitter Mercy may be wielded, and so forth. In addition, the law states that the hare must have a genuine chance to escape the hunt, no matter how slim. In practice, this condition has been defined as the availability of 6 keys which, if gathered together in the Temple of Daedric Rites, permit the hare to teleport away from the hunt, and so elude the huntsman and his spear. It is inconceivable, of course, that the hare might actually discover the keys and escape, but the forms must be observed, and tampering with the keys or cheating the hare of a genuine chance of finding or using the keys is a shameful and unforgivable betrayal of the law of the hunt. So, you are still awake and still listening? Well, then there is another video on the screen right now. If you haven't done so already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to catch the next audiobooks as well. And with that, I hope you hear me next time.